Welcome to another edition of Horner's Corner. I'm Ray Horner here on 93.5, 1590 WAKR and WAOH.TV. Well, he first became prominent in the city of Akron, quarterbacking the Kenmore Cardinals. And then once he started leading our city, he attacked the mayor's office with the same aggressive mentality and really carved the rejuvenated city of Akron for many years once he became the mayor that started in 1987. We're having the opportunity to sit down with a good friend of mine through the years and certainly a gentleman that we know a whole lot about, and that's former Akron Mayor Don Plusquellic, who joins us this month on Horner's Corner. Don, thanks for making time for us and joining us today.
Always glad to do it for you, Ray.
Okay, well, let's go back, and I like to start these interviews because you were quarterback of the Kenmore Cardinals, but really your mentality was really carved, and you've brought it up to me a number of times, by your parents and your dad, who worked in the rubber companies and really gave you the mentality of what this city is all about.
Well, I think the grit, is what the one word I would use to kind of use my parents as an example. My father went into the Navy coming out of Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, the coal mine country,
yep.
Indiana, Pennsylvania, and went into the Navy right after the war started. And my mother's father came here because the coal mines were drying up to get a job at Firestone. And my father kept kind of track as he was still there, writing letters, and came back. And I think the resiliency of this community and the grit that it takes to just hunker down and get things done and work hard, obviously that's, I believe, one of the things I inherited from my parents. Now, I tell people, and I joke with my mother even recently, that she's Scotch-Irish. And I did the swab thing, the new generation now, I did the swab. Found out I was 34% Irish, and I said to people, that explains a lot about me. I won't go into that anymore. I don't want my Irish friends, I'm proud of it. I've been to Ireland several times, proud to look up the history of the family, but I think that gives some sense of the background of my family sort of fighting through difficulties, surviving the war, 4 years in the Pacific, coming back and working 26 years in the rubber shops, transferring the last 7 years into the tire building job classification, really a tough job back then. And yeah, I think that certainly I have said this and recently with my mother, that the lessons that I learned from them, examples, and taking me to church, every morning, have 7 straight years of perfect attendance at Sunday school, and all of those lessons that I believe helped me, that I drew back on when I was older and had to make tough decisions.
I mentioned Don was quarterback, of course, Kenmore Cardinals. You took the athletics to Bowling Green State University. You quarterbacked
Actually,
there.
Pitt first.
Pitt first.
2 years at Pitt.
Then Bowling Green, and then you end up at the University of Akron for law school. So there's a lot there with education, but you came back to Akron after going to different cities. Obviously, Mom and Dad probably had a draw there with that. But at that state of your life, did you figure yourself of making a mark in our city? Obviously, you had a love for Akron.
It's strange, and I'm going to feel like maybe after I get at the end of this interview that I should be on the couch. This is my psychiatrist talking to you. You're bringing back and dredging up a lot of things. But it's funny, as a 13-year-old, and I would say that my mom spoiled me, and I was sort of a mama's boy. I got punched by a kid when I was 11 in Little League when I slid into second base, and I stood there and cried. And somehow when I was 13, and I can't explain everything, but instead of playing baseball and some other sports, I turned to football, and I didn't take anything from anybody. I might have been the first one to throw a punch on my football team, unfortunately. But I just had this sense that I wanted to be somebody. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what direction. I never had, honestly, even after I became mayor, after Tom Sawyer won and I became mayor, I told people, until Gary Rosen kicked me several times at an event, to say you can't say you didn't want to be or don't want to be mayor. You're mayor now. You either have to decide or not. But I never had that dream of being mayor. I really didn't. But I knew I wanted to be somebody. And I think that's important to not only build hope like that in a kid's life. I mean, my parents never kind of held me back, but they didn't really think in many ways that, there was a direction, in my case, through football. Right. A lot of kids it's through music or dance or a lot of other sports. Luckily, and I happen to think it's the best thing, for women, sports now, scholarships, professional leagues, I mean, a whole host of things that every kid can literally be told, and it's the truth, that you can be anything you want to be. The problem in our society, and I'm getting off into something else, but we haven't built the paths to that opportunity. I just was so fortunate in my life, and it is so unbelievable when you look back and think. First of all, I had two parents who were home every night. I had the best coaches that anybody could have had in football, especially at that time, because we threw the ball 50%. And I'm so thankful that I was able to do that. Instead of, I joked around with Tim Flossie, who became my great friend from Garfield. He got to hand off and go out and block. And he used to say, the only reason I was quarterback was because I was the third fastest guard, because the first two got to play guard and I got to play quarterback. And we had, a lot of fun over the years talking about things. But I got to throw the ball in an era where everybody was 3 yards in a clouded mess.
Right.
And it's interesting, in your opening, I thought, I'm going to get an opportunity to say this. I always wanted to give a State of the City speech that was based on football strategy and what Ohio needed to be in a parallel path, what I'm describing as the football mentality that needed to change. Our big, brawny guys like my dad that built tires by moving things around, their strength. We needed to start getting smarter work because everything was computerized and everything was robotics, and we had to make that change economically the same way the football teams made the change to throwing the ball and creative offenses, because we didn't have the biggest guys all of a sudden that we just handed off and ran over people. And it was, all my staff said, you can't, people won't understand it. Well, I happen to think a lot of people would understand that the same way that the football game morphed into a really smart coach's game of offense and even defense, moving, having different plays on defense to go one direction or another to confuse the offense. Our economy here and the people who were driving that needed to understand that the world had changed. We're not we just don't have the biggest people and we just run over people. The Japanese, the Germans with their technology and high-tech engineering in the automobile industry, and then a whole host of things that happen obviously with China and a whole lot of other people. So I could have given that speech in 1988, and I was told, that's probably not a good idea. But and I will throw one last thing in. I was recruited by Ohio State. I never really bought into that philosophy that quarterbacks should be leading the sweeps around the end and taking on those big guys. Quarterbacks are there to throw, like Tom Brady. I doubt if he ever threw a block, but he was the best quarterback. And I just had this feeling that, and I would say this, and there'll be a lot of people who still are Ohio State fans, that Ohio State has phenomenal football. They've developed linebackers and tackles and running backs galore. But until the last 3 years, they haven't had a single quarterback that's ever made it in the pros, because their philosophy was not looking at that position and preparing them. And I probably getting too much into the sports part of this, but my staff used to always say, God, that guy, just ask him a question about football. He's going to be here for 20 minutes. So you open with the football thing, and my mind starts to go there.
Well, let's continue down that road a little bit, as I want to talk a little bit about leading the city of Akron. And you attacked the city of Akron pretty much that way of being quarterback. And you came in 1987 to quarterback the city of Akron to be the mayor in a time of transition. We had to go from a rubber capital, You made the move to polymer, but you needed to be an aggressive mayor. At least we needed that because there were so many things that you helped form. We can talk about the ballpark. We can talk about different aspects, the JED programs that you really, the school funding that we needed to be aggressive on. And I thought you were the right person at the right time to lead that and be aggressive. And go back to those times, Don, of the late 80s into the 90s when you had to look at our city in the mirror and say, we can't go on this way, just like you said with football. We got to make a change, and you needed to be strong to do that.
Well, I'm going to go back one layer before that in terms of historical. My grandmother, when I started to turn 16 and I was going to get my first job at McDonald's, she had worked in retail, Polsky's, and she said, Donnie, you need to know when you work with people, the vast majority of people, even if you mess up, they're going to be okay. But there's a group of people, and no matter how hard you work, no matter what you do for them, they're never going to be happy. And if you only focus on that group, you won't take care of everyone else. And I swear to God, it's the best advice that I ever got in life, and it's the best advice in politics. The simple version of that is you can't make everybody happy. Right. And maybe I didn't understand that quite at 16, but I learned it over my time on city council. And I am a total believer. We did something very unique here my last year in office to get people instead of asking for a town meeting and only a few people show up, and it's usually the same people. We went out to people in their church groups, in their neighborhood organizations, in their art groups and sports groups, and we went to them and said, hey, what do you think? And we gave them these little clickers that they could choose without having to stand up and without having to sit there and listen to the same speakers who show up at every single meeting to somehow talk about their gripes. And it was the best feedback we'd ever gotten. So I believe totally in the fundamental aspect of community involvement. But as I just said a couple days ago, someone, at the very most that you ever get at a ward meeting, and that's if there's a controversial zoning, it's 100 people. And you know, in every ward, there's about 20,000 people. So you get 100 people out of 20,000. That doesn't really represent people. I mean, everyone. And Richard Nixon, who, you know, if I say that name now, a lot of listeners who haven't really studied history, was one of the best presidents, except for his problems. Well, that and, you know, his paranoia. Right. He developed the EPA, but he sent you $100 million check when he told you you had a $120 million problem with your sewer system. He developed the tax sharing, revenue sharing. So one part of the country is doing well. He did so much that he understood this community development block grant that's still in effect to be able to give money to communities, 50,000 and over, and then there's another pot, the state, for small communities, to address things like housing and economic development. I mean, he was just phenomenal, but he said something that I totally agree with. And it really sort of goes to my family, because my dad went to union meetings, and my mom was involved in the PTA, but they didn't go to political meetings. They didn't go to city council meetings. You know why? They had 4 kids, and they were running them around like soccer moms, you know? Right. All these things that people do in their life. Richard Nixon said the silent majority. And it hit home with me that, you know what? I'm obligated, yes, to listen to the 3 loudmouths that stand up at a meeting and scream, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. But I'm also obligated to all of those people that work hard every day in their homes.
We're, of course, this month sitting here on Horner's Corner with former Akron Mayor Don Plusquellic. And we've used some football analogies, and I think you can tell the former mayor loves the game of football. But you also have to have a vision of, say, an ownership or a head coach. And once you moved into the mayor's desk, Don, let's go there, because your vision was looking at the city of Akron from Lot 3 to the baseball ballpark to dollars with the JED program. So let's go in, because not everyone was on board with all of these things, but it was your vision that said, hey, this is what we've got to do.
Yeah, well, I draw back to my grandmother, said, you're not going to please everyone. So, but you have to know, first of all, from experience and background, some education that I received, obviously 13 years on city council, the last 3 as president, leading people, doing little small department management at Goodrich, you learn and have experiences that help you in those times where you have different directions. But I knew we needed to build the economy. The number 1 and 2, and it went back and forth at any period of time, just prior to my taking office, was jobs and the economy and safety. And I would argue those haven't changed in all these years because our society is struggling with a lot of things that change in the world. I mean, think about it. We built the tires for literally, virtually every country in the world and shipped them. And we shipped them to other places in the country. And then our jobs moved south because people moved. And I tell people, and especially older people, just think about it. None of our jobs went to China. China didn't even exist in the way we know it now. When our jobs started moving in the late 50s, 60s, and early 70s, they moved south. And then they realized they could move somewhere else and save some money. And they were selling tires around the world. So, for instance, Goodyear has a plant in Slovenia. I built a tire using my finger and my toe to push buttons because it's all automated. And it was an awakening for many in this community because you get comfortable, just like my grandfather was in the coal mines. Right. And we needed to morph, to change, to figure out which way is the world going. Look around the corner, look into the future. And polymers obviously was the good fortune that we had, that during World War II, the need to get something to replace raw rubber, because raw rubber wasn't grown in Akron, and you had to get it across the sea, so the federal government coordinated those efforts between the 4 major rubber companies to send their research to the University of Akron, and they started the polymer research and development. And that spawned all of these small little polymer companies. And that was one we needed to know, the medical and all of the things that we could do to match up with anybody in the world here if we prepared our people properly. And that is a huge problem. That's why I proposed leasing the sewer system to provide a college education for everyone, because the bridge to the new economy, whatever it is, 100 years from now, the bridge will always be having people trained for that new economy. And I tell people that we started in Akron, and Russ Pry would always add, Don was there, he remembers, but in 1843 or something, they started the first public school system here. It was called the Akron Plan. And they needed to teach people just basic of reading and mathematics so they could do the bill of lading and understand it and add, because that's all you needed. Then we had one of the first public high schools, because even when my father graduated, he would have said, Louis, get your high school education, you always get a job. Well, that really hadn't been true for 50 years or so. You needed additional training, especially in computers. So giving kids that opportunity, the real opportunity, because we prepare them, and we should prepare them for the future jobs, not the past. We could go out and do weightlifting every day and teach how to build a tire, because that's what it required from my father. But that's not what is going to happen in the future. So I understood that. And then we did a lot of things to try to change the police department. And it's just systemically so difficult to retrain people who are just accustomed to doing something the way they've always done it. And that was a difficult task. But also the services and the things that we needed to have to better serve our public, like the automated garbage cans that people used to have in their backyard, and they spill garbage all over. But the JEDs were something that I had a long-standing problem with the city not annexing as Columbus did. Every time a developer went to Mayor Sensenbrenner back in the 50s and said, hey, we'd like to have water, he said, okay, just sign this petition. And they became part of Columbus. Columbus is in 5 counties now. And the city, on the other hand, turned down the merger of the Fairlawn government officials, and then they extended water and sewer, and they built Summit Mall. And it was the first development that helped take business away from downtown, and we continued to do it. Cleveland has done it, still does it. But when I came up with the JED idea, I said, okay, we're extending water and sewer, But in any business deal, there would have to be something that comes back to accrue to the citizens of Akron. And that's how I came up with this new concept that had never been tried in the country, to do the JEDs, and they're still in existence today. I just actually worked for the city as a consultant and renegotiated the Coventry deal to give them a little more share and expand the JEDs. So it was creativity, it was sitting down and using common sense and looking at other people and what they had done in the private sector to improve our systems and try to better serve the citizens of Akron. That was my job.
You talked about the mindset in Akron and the generations to come as well, and that had to do with changing the mindset of many people in Akron when we talk about the downtown area. And I want to go to the baseball ballpark, and I want to go to Lock 3, because what you needed to do was have people enjoy our downtown again, and you were a big part of that.
Well, I said when I ran in '87, and I'd already been through all of the things that, well, why do we need a downtown? You know, people are so accustomed to go to the malls and mall walkers, they call them. You know, well, we don't need a downtown. But downtown is the first thing that people come to the community and see as a front door. It's like if you're trying to sell your house, the first thing they're going to tell you is, okay, paint the front door, or paint around the front, put some new flowers in there, because the first image is so important. And so I knew the importance of downtown. Plus, we had spent millions of dollars on all of the infrastructure, including parking decks, and they were used from 7:30 until 5, and then boom, it was a ghost town. Yeah. So I knew the value we built. We had a concept for years, and the planning department always conceptualized about how wonderful downtown could be, but there was no real action. And I give a couple things credit, that the opportunity to bring in the baseball stadium. And baseball stadiums are more valuable than just about anything, because people come, it's the summertime, they're walking, and they see other restaurants and they see things. And Mary Means was hired by the chamber to come in and advise us on rebuilding downtown. And she said downtowns need to be like playing a pinball machine. You get the most points by keeping the ball in action. So you want people to come down to go to a baseball stadium, but you want them to go over here to this restaurant, and then you might want them to go over here for some other venue. And that was important. But Lock 3, we had people in economic development, I had people in planning, but nobody took charge. And when I finally was able to convince Dave Lieberth to come in and work for me, I kept saying, you know, you're really more of a government kind of guy. You do all of these things for all these organizations, you give away your talents, come in and do that here. And he said, well, I've always had interest in downtown. Perfect. And he really drove everybody to come together to really develop Lock 3 as a wonderful venue for people to come down. And you know, I did ask a question one time, how many of you are not from Akron? And I expected only like 20% or something. And more people raised their hand that were from the suburbs that came down. I talked to people all over this area that would come and say, it's wonderful, we feel safe here. It was just a wonderful venue. But when they come to a magnet, like the Civic Theater, and when you can keep them coming back, then you can see that they go to other places to get something to eat. Right. And keeping those places open in the evening helps their business to keep them open during the day. And when I first came in, we did exit interviews with companies who were leaving, and they said, my employees just can't, there's always a safety issue in any downtown, but they can't find places to eat because so many businesses couldn't survive just on lunch. Right. So having that extra business in the evening was able to keep them, and people don't understand that we had more people working in downtown at that time than anywhere else in the county. It was the largest place of employment. Office workers, sure, the restaurants workers don't make as much money, but for college kids and people first coming in, it's great jobs, and then they go on to something else. And I understood that connection and nexus between what we needed to do, and it really worked back then.
It was a great puzzle that was put together, for sure. I want to go economically again too, because one thing that we haven't talked about, and you talked about the economics here and how some of the rubber companies moved south, but you were really instrumental in going to other countries and spreading the knowledge of Akron and getting the knowledge from other countries and bringing it back into Akron. I think of Germany for one country that you went to. And talk about in Israel, talk about that idea, that mindset where you were taking people to other countries, exchanging ideas, but yet bringing economic value back to Akron.
Well, and I have to give Bob Bowman credit for this because it really wasn't my idea. I was so focused on helping Akron businesses, making it easier, completely revamping the building code because people told me how hard it was in our building department, and eventually disbanded the building department because they still were such obstructionist almost to construction that I just let the county take over, and I got a lot of compliments. But Bob Bowman was hired by the chamber, and he had worked at other areas, and he was telling me, Don, there's so much potential. I happen to know that there's, I think it's $20 billion of investment each and every year by outside companies coming in. And as I tell people, and I had to go back and let them think a minute. First of all, the person that started the first rubber company here in Akron was not from Akron. It was a guy who was a physician, Benjamin Franklin Goodrich, and he had accumulated enough money that he wanted to invest, and he invested in a bicycle tire and fire hose company in New York City, and he got on a train. And you can only imagine in the late 1800s how long it took to get to Akron. Yeah. Somehow, nobody knows this real story, but he got off here. Businesses loaned him, I think it was $17,000 to come in and take over an old match company building that we know now as Goodrich, that we're sitting in right now. Yeah. And that was the start. Harvey Firestone was not from Akron. He's from Ohio, but he moved here. Each person that said, I think I can start a better company, all of a sudden Goodyear was started, Firestone obviously was started. But the point of that is that we can't just be here without looking at the world. And the world economy now, we built these rubber companies and they sold tires all over the country. Now companies are coming here, we allowed them. I don't get that choice. But if they're coming here, I want our share. Why should we just allow them to go south? Let's take our share. And I'll give you another credit, and people are going to listen to this and say, boy, that mayor's just turned crazy. I'm going to give Jim Rhodes credit. At least for one thing, he understood that, hey, these companies are coming to build cars. Why would we just let them all go to the Carolinas and Alabama? So he recruited Honda. And Honda, I believe, the last time I checked, has 15,000 employees paying taxes, building cars right here in southeast Ohio. I listened to Bob and I said, yeah, we can compete. We can compete in the machining, we can compete in polymers, medical instruments, a whole host of things. And so we went out and we had tremendous, no matter what anybody has been told, we had tremendous success. And I hate to use them as a source, but even in 2011, I had Bob and Sam DeSajar go down, and the Beacon Journal wrote a column saying, we don't need to argue about this again. For every dollar that was spent on the mayor's travel, we had $3,900 spent here in investment, and that didn't count the income tax that's paid every year by those workers. And they're Akron area workers. It's not that we bring German workers over or Israeli workers, it's the companies. And of course, you know that 3 of our major rubber companies now are owned by foreign companies. Yeah. How can we possibly say, no, we're just an Akron company? It's just not the way the world is. As much as I'd like to wave a magic wand, and I told people, I would bring that smell of rubber back if I had a magic wand, and we'll figure out how to clean the air later. But give me those 90,000 jobs in the rubber industry or whatever it was, I'll take that. And I'll deal with the issues. But it's just not the way the world is. And as I said, the way we need to prepare our young people is for the jobs of the future. A mayor needs to look out into the future and say, I need to prepare for this, not wishing and hoping and trying to play on people's fears about what's in the past.
With us is former Akron Mayor Don Plusquellic, joining us this month on Horner's Corner. Started serving us as mayor in 1987. Let's go to 2015. We've got a few minutes left on. You're in the mayor's seat, and all of a sudden, you stepped down as mayor. And that's where I wanted to bring this full circle, because there's a lot of questions. You came on my show a couple of days after that. And as a matter of fact, you called me and you said, hey, listen, not ready right now. Give me a couple days. I want to come on the show and talk about it. There's still a lot of people that were wondering what prompted you to step aside. And if you don't mind me asking, because a lot of people, they love their dog on the bone. You know what I would always say about Mayor Plusquellic, and I said this on WAKR, he's a dog, ornery dog on a bone, but you know what? He was our ornery dog on a bone. Don, what prompted that, if you don't mind that question, of stepping down in 2015 from mayor of our city?
Well, it's funny, I grabbed for a drink just as you were asking me that. If I'd have known you were going to 2015, I would have had to put a shot of vodka in. So I really told you what I think, but and I hope the viewers appreciate that. But
I'm sure they do.
You know, we got into a position where we had some really bad actors on city council. And whether people want to believe me or not, the proof is in the pudding. We had a councilman who was very threatening in the way he talked to me and doing things, and behind the scenes with other people as well on city council, and sending letters that got indicted about 6 or 8 months after I left. And I kept trying to talk about it in a way that some folks at the Beacon in particular just refused to believe me. And then we had a situation with the federal judge that everyone really knew. But we had such bad decisions, or he steered the jury into such bad decisions in the fire department, that we were not allowed to make promotions for over 10 years. And when we did, he forced us. And my law department said, Mayor, you have to do it because he'll put you in jail. We, in the 21st century, we were forced to promote white firefighters who had never passed a promotional exam and jump over African American firefighters that had passed exams. And if anyone out there in this world can explain that to me, then you're smarter than I am, but it was bizarre. And we had a number of those cases, one after the other. The sewer case, we had deals with the EPA. I had 3 different agreements with the EPA, and suddenly he would overrule them. He doesn't have an environmental background. He doesn't have a scientific background. He just was off. And I'll leave it at that, except that about 7 months afterwards, he was voted by the trial attorneys organization, this is unofficial, but as the worst federal judge in this country. But more importantly, by the group of judges, federal judges that are assigned officially to monitor other judges, because if they have a lifetime job, you know, as you get older, something happens sometimes to some people, or there's corruption, whatever. They, in an official report, said that he had to have a fit-for-duty mental test before they would assign him another case. And one other aspect, the appeals court removed one of the city's cases without anybody filing anything. So I think in both of those cases, people would look back. The Beacons never had the decency to ever write the article, you know, we were wrong about, it wasn't Don Plusquellic. The problem with the federal judge is I couldn't find an attorney, and we interviewed some really named attorneys here or law firms, and they were all afraid of him, including my own law director. Personally afraid that he would be vindictive, and if they filed a motion to have him removed. So I said, this isn't Putin. We're not in Russia. I'm going to write a letter and make it public. I also knew from inside sources that the appeals court disliked him, that he was not considered legitimate in many of his cases. We just needed to file something. So I filed an open letter, and my God, the floodgates unloaded, especially from some of the people who I had been before pretty close to at the Beacon, writing nasty things that I obviously had lost my mind. No, I was totally sane. It was him. And nobody would listen to me that it was a councilman doing things, and I finally just realized that I watched the Beacon run out of town. 3 different county executives because of the craziness that was going on in county council. And I just said, this is my town, they're not running me out. I'd rather quit so I can stay. And so I stayed. I didn't move to Florida, move to Maryland, and move to other places. And I've spent a lot of time in Florida because my son moved down there and took the young grandkids. Yeah. But my intention was to stay. My mom was still here. My family was still here at that time. And I just decided after 41 and a half years, if they don't understand the not only tradition, but the long history, legitimate history they could look at, 28 and a half years, and no person in my cabinet was ever accused of a crime or convicted of a crime. I believe it's the longest stretch of any city over 100,000. And yet, that didn't carry any weight. And they still don't have the decency to write a front page article and say, we were wrong. It wasn't Plusquellic that went crazy, it were these other things that went on. So I just said after 41 and a half years, I spent my life given to this community. I'm not gonna have my reputation ruined by unscrupulous people at the Beacon Journal. So, and we now know what the Beacon Journal has turned into. Practically, you know, a matchbook in terms of news. And
fast forward to now, folks. Don has really become a happy man. He's spending a lot of his time in Florida, still has family ties here in the Akron area. I guess I have one final question, and that is everything that we've talked about, so many positive things that you had, let's say, your footprint on here in the Akron area, and knowing you from time to time, you'll step back and look at those things. And you and I have talked about this before. Is the JED program the thing that you look back and say that was the high point of Don Plusquellic, of Mayor of Akron? Was it the ballpark? Was it what you just mentioned, everyone working together with a team? If you had to sum it up with one aspect of your run of 28 plus years of Mayor of Akron, what would be at the top of that board?
I mean, it's always impossible for me to just answer one way. I used to be asked, what's the highest priority you have? And I said, well, if your mom's house is being broken into and your daughter's house is on fire, which one of those do you want me to prioritize? As a mayor, you got to do everything. Yeah. You literally are doing economic development, public safety, public service. And I think the JED was obviously way up there. Bringing back downtown and the stadium being the beginning, and obviously Lock 3, Dave Lieberth, saving Goodyear and Firestone. You know, it's one day you didn't mention. Yeah. Whereas we can see cities all around us that they've lost major. We were able to save both of those. And then the school funding that really should have given us an opportunity to change. There's another system that I really am frustrated because they couldn't just get out of the box of the way we've always done it. It just seems like they just couldn't accept new concepts and do things the way I would have if I would have been running the school system. So I think all of those, and I mentioned to you, looking back, 28 and a half years without anybody ever getting into a legal problem in my cabinet. I'm very proud of that. It's an accomplishment because our society's become so detail-oriented and difficult that you can sneeze and say, hey, he's doing something. So, I mean, I'm proud, very proud of that with the people that agreed to work with me and worked over those many years. So there's a whole host of things, including going on your show and trying to feel like I was part of the community that you bring people in and always have. I've always appreciated that. And sometimes you ask tough questions and, you know, pry into things, and it's totally appropriate. You bring both candidates in during election time. That's like a debate. That's part of our process. And I wished we had more people like you in the news business that were, it's true though, as much as I criticized, I did it because I wanted the Beacon to get better, because I know as much as anybody in this country the importance of news and accurate news and people being able to pick up something. I don't care if it's my phone. I understand we don't have to tear down, rip down trees and print paper. I understand that. Right. But having something that everyone can depend on that's accurate is probably the most needed thing in our society now. And you played a part in that in this community. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Former Akron Mayor Don Plusquellic has been with us this month on Horner's Corner. And, you know, just to tell you where he is, he came up to Akron for a couple of days. I had talked to him about 2 months ago wanting to do the interview. He didn't have time at that point. He was stuck out of state, came up, said, hey, do you want to do this? We said, yeah, we made it happen. Mayor, it's good seeing you again. Thanks for being our guest.
Thanks.
Former Akron Mayor Don Plusquellic joining us this month on Horner's Corner. I'm Ray Horner.